Welcome, everyone. I am here as your host of the second half of the day and also be moderating this upcoming session. Hopefully, you all got a chance to inhale some lunch in between or had some coffee if it's early for you, or dinner if it's late at night. But hopefully, you got rehydrated, re-energized, because we've got so much more to do this afternoon. Super excited to have you all back for the second half of our session today for day one. And we have so much planned for you this afternoon, but I'm really excited about this specific session that we're going to be talking about here in a minute. My name is Marjorie Abdelkrime, and I lead our multi-cloud architecture and strategy team here at VMware. It's a global team of individuals that help our customers really understand their cloud journeys. And this conversation that we're going to be talking about, digitizing and accelerating the impact of pre-sales, is one that's really important to me, because as I think about the customers that we need to engage with at a global level, how do we engage with them in a more effective manner? That will be the conversation that we talk about today. Before we get into that, I wanted to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll talk a little bit about the state of digitizing and accelerating the pre-sales impact. So let's start off with Cristina. Can you give us a quick intro?
Sure, Marjorie. Thank you. I'm Cristina Randazzo, Head of Americas Territory Technical Sales at Autodesk.
Thank you, Cristina. Rob?
Thanks, Marjorie. Hi, my name's Rob Bruce, and I am the Global Pre-Sales Vice President at Stebo Systems. I also act as the Chief Evangelist.
Welcome, Rob. And Delia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Delia Parman, and I lead the U.S. and EMEA solution consulting teams for mid-market here at Medidata Solutions.
Welcome to all of our panelists, and we'll hear a little bit from each of you on your thoughts around this specific topic. But let's talk a little bit about what the state is and what it is that we're going to be talking about, and really what does the market think about that. But wanted to thank our sponsors. Hopefully this is working here there we go. All right. New technology, by the way, thinking about digitizing our experiences here. So, but wanted to thank our sponsors, Consensus, who help us deliver a better experience, not just live demos. Hopefully some of you are, leveraging their technology around intelligent demo automation and the work that they do. And they work with several organizations that many of you have probably heard of. And again, technology is not my friend today. Here we go. Sorry. All right. So they help the organization scale pre-sales for enterprise software. So they work with organizations like Salesforce, Slack, you name it, right? Dell, our former parent company, and many more, to really help their pre-sales engineers around this. And one of the really cool things that I like about Consensus is the data that they produce as a result of some of the research that they do. So hopefully you all have checked out some of the reports that they produced, because it's very insightful information. But let's talk about the impact on digital acceleration. If we think about COVID-19 and what they did, you maybe you all have seen kind of that comic strip icon of where there's like the big wrecking ball that's coming, and the CIO sitting in the conference room saying, yeah, we're thinking about digital transformation, and then you've got COVID-19 as a big wrecking ball accelerating that impact. And really what has happened and what we're seeing within companies at VMware and with other companies that I've talked to around what our customers are saying is this need for remote engagement. And how do you drive that engagement will be something that we'll talk about here a little bit more, but that's one big part. The other part is really around ease of order processing, the e-commerce models that they're looking to be able to acquire things in a much simpler fashion. And really what other organizations are doing on a much lower scale is there's little focus on the customer. That's not something that they're interested in driving. They're looking at, the ability to drive customer solutions. And then the limited tools is one of the big challenges that we are facing. And one of the big problems that a lot of our partners have helped solve, and they're helping solve over their solutions that they're producing. So something really to think about as we are looking at kind of the next realm of the solution engineer and the role that they bring to our customers. Earlier, we heard from James as well as other panelists who talked about the impact of the SE and the role that they have with our customers. Let's think about now the SE 4.0, right? We've been talking about SE 1.0, 2.0. I've talked about SE 3.0. I think we're getting into this new 4.0 era where we think about this accelerated model of how our organizations are engaging with our customers. Now, wow, yeah, this is much better. So the other component around the impact really that we need to think about is around the organizational resilience and what are companies looking at? And we think about some of the requirements from a people perspective as well beyond the tooling, well beyond, the expectations of our customers, but something from our own individual employees that they're seeking, right? The ability to have coaching conversations. How do you facilitate that? How do you drive the more empathetic engagement over a video conference that traditionally wasn't the format that you leveraged to have kind of that really in-depth discussion? The other pieces around, employee recognition, that's extremely high today. Every employee I talk to within VMware, that's something that they want on a daily basis. They want to be recognized for the work that they're doing, and they want to hear it from their leadership. They don't just want to hear it from their peers. And then really the likelihood of adopting new technology, new collaboration tools. I mean, COVID really brought that to us, right? Zoom, while many of us used it, we weren't necessarily using it as power users, in my opinion, as we do today, right? We've got whiteboards within Zoom. We've got Miro, which is another tool. Talk about camera galore. Some of the folks that I work with have these amazing camera setups. And that's been this need to continue to drive engagement around tool adoption. But with that, I want to bring over our panelists to talk a little bit more around, the hybrid workplace. What does it mean? And how is it impacting their teams? And how are they looking at it from within their organization? So with that, I want to go ahead and stop the slides so we can see all of our panelists and see all their lovely faces. Amazing. Thank you. Welcome. And, y'all, we've been talking about this topic, I think, as an industry over the past couple of months around what comes next, right? Now that everyone's looking at post-COVID era, what does that look like? And really, the transformation of these organizations. But we have some great questions here from other team members that we have heard from. And, when we think about the changing landscape and what's shifted, I want to talk to Rob here for a second. And I touched on this slightly, the impact of empathy. How does empathy change your strategy as it results to digital acceleration?
Oh, that's a great question. Because the buying process is so emotional, and because the buyer is so emotional, and you're going through this ray of emotion and talking about empathy, and you used to fly into an organization and you may meet face to face. And you get that personal touch. Now in a new digital environment, that's a challenge to do that. So how do you recreate that digitally transforming using things like consensus and other solutions to do that? You become the buyer's hand in the guidance of the buying process. You need tools that allow you to keep that connection as if you were here with me in the room. To have that, what we call a data therapy in our terms, where we are really empathizing, listening, prescribing, and making sure that we understand the buyer and understand what they're after before we even demonstrate. Making sure that we discover and meet their needs. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we saw over the last 18 months, especially in my industry, where the demonstration of the solution is so critical that you're not going to get to the end of the deal without having that true touch point. So how do you make it emotional? How do you make it positive? That's the big challenge. And I think solutions like video enablement solutions like Consensus and others allow us to reduce that time that the buyer also takes waiting for those demos or waiting for those demo resources. So it allows us to scale, making them happier, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. I think that's super important, right? The notion of the emotional connection. They always say buyers buy from people, right? And people requires that human to human engagement. With that, as we think about this, Delia, and we think about some of the common hurdles that pre-sales engineers face, what are the leaders that in your organization or people that you're working with, how are you looking to revamp the strategy around your digital strategy?
Thank you, Marjorie. I think the main hurdle that we run into with both the leadership executive teams and the sales organization is what I call ADITW, We've always done it this way. And it's very hard for people to adjust and make changes the way we've had to make them over the last couple of years, because there is a fear of changing the sales cycle, of not being able to have the same kind of impact that we do on site. There's the idea that, will the prospects really respond to us using these tools, either videos or web conferencing like we do right now? And then the other hurdle that I think we are all having to overcome is, how do we use these tools properly? We need coaching and enablement to understand how we project in web meetings over Zoom. Are we really relating to and resonating with the people that we're talking to Rob's point? So for my teams and the hurdles that we've had over the last couple of years, I think we've just had to overcome the idea of not being on site in front of people and still being productive and effective. And actually, we've proven that in some ways we can do it even better.
Yeah, I love that, that do it even better. I think there's always this fear of change, right? And demonstrating the positive outcomes and the positive results of doing this in a more effective manner will be how we chart this path forward. But as we think about the path forward, right? And Cristina, I wanted to hear a little bit from you, and Delia, I'll come to you as well afterwards. But we think about the tools that are required. What role do they play in this digital acceleration?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I like to categorize tools in two groups. So one, it is scaling, another one is automation. So some tools enables us to scale pre-sales. That means reaching more customers, doing more pre-sales without investing in more SEs. And Consensus is a good example of that. Other tools automate back office activities. They increase efficiency, freeing up SE's time to invest in more high-value business opportunities. If the tool either falls into the scaling or automation category, adoption is a key player when we talk about implementing tech solution. The better the tool interface is translating into ease to use, the higher adoption will be, translated into digital acceleration. On the flip side, it is important to take into consideration the level of process change required by the tool. Some solutions, they promise amazing results, but they require a high level of process change. So it is important to see how the changing process will affect the organization and if its benefits outweigh the burden of change.
Thanks for that response, Cristina. I think thinking about that as we're looking at the future of the digital acceleration that we're talking about here will be extremely important. Delia, would love to hear your thoughts on this, on how tools play a role in this.
I appreciate what Cristina just said about making sure that whatever digital tools we're using, they don't burden the process, but rather enhance the process. And I think that those are the kinds of things that you want to go to in a situation like this. For example, Zoom meetings versus WebEx meetings versus Skype versus whatever the situation might be. And our company uses the Consensus solutions frequently. And what we've learned is that you don't have to change the sales cycle, but you're using these tools to enhance each step of that sales cycle in a way that you might not be able to do otherwise. For example, we're able to use these demo videos for our BDRs to be able to, at the top of the funnel, to generate a lot more interest than just a phone call or an email. But also there's an ad hoc video capability that a sales rep can get on a video and record a little video of inviting a customer to the next upcoming webinar or user group meeting. And so what we found is that, to Cristina's point, there's a way to be able not only to scale what the pre-sales department is doing, but also what the sales organization itself is able to do without making them change every step of the process that they use.
Yeah, I love the video piece because it just creates such a human connection that, written email sometimes misses, right? That smile, that engagement. So I love all these tools that are integrating what Rob was talking about earlier, right? That human emotional component and demonstrating to the customer that, there's some empathy there, that you actually care about some of the challenges that they're going through. Cristina, let's ask you this, as we think about, the organizational structure and the people components of it, when we think about the role of the sales account executive, and I know earlier we talked a lot about the partnership between the SE and the AE, but as we think of this new world where we're accelerating towards this digital platform and digital engagement, what's the role of the account executive in your mind?
As you said, partnership, it is still key for me. And I see account executives as our internal users. Almost everything we do cross AEs in some way. Having that said, AEs are a key part of the digital acceleration. I engage AEs leadership early in the process when I plan to implement some kind of business transformation. That way, we are aligned on the business goals and I get their buy-in so they sell the idea to their teams. Most of the transformation projects I've been involved with, they require some change in the sales process, as we talked before, and adoption by the AEs. We could have not been successful without their commitment. Even though organizations can differ, sometimes SEs are part of the sales organizations, other times not. What really matters is to consider the functional organization. When there is no formal reporting structure between SEs and the sales organization, I think the collaboration spirit is key to drive common success.
Yeah, that's super important. I think the AE SE relationship, and I know earlier there was discussion around ratios and how that's all being managed and whatnot, but having that partnership, like you called it, I think it's extremely important that it's viewed as such, because without one, there isn't the other. And it's extremely important. I've seen organizations where we've gotten rid of AEs because we thought the SEs could handle it all. But between the two of them, if they don't exist and they're not handling their own roles and responsibilities, this could definitely not be as successful an endeavor as many companies want to go through. Let me go back to Delia. There was a question here from one of our audience members, and reminder for folks, leverage Slack or the Q&A function for any questions y'all might have. But from your point on the demo videos related to the BDR emails, how do you balance the impact to prospect versus what can potentially be turned into competitive intel for your competitors?
That's a really good question. We talk about that a lot here when we're producing these videos. I think for us, there's the idea that whatever we publish that we can send out to customers are things that we could put out to the public no matter what. And look, for some of us, our technologies across the competitive landscape are fairly similar. So in the big picture, lots of us are doing the same kinds of things. Perhaps the way that we do them, depending upon the company, may be more efficient or a better way to do those particular kinds of functions. So when we are looking at the videos that we want to generally distribute to customers, those are the same kinds of things that we would put out on YouTube or on our company's website. But there's also the capability, at least in the consensus system, for you to create your own personal specific videos to a customer that will only go to that particular individual or group. In those kinds of situations, then you're able to be a little bit more prescriptive in what you're talking about and what you're showing.
Yeah. And that customized touch, right? Because you could send YouTube links all day long, but without that customization, you miss that opportunity of that customer engagement, especially if you're already engaged with them and you're talking to them about something, or there's something already, from an opportunity standpoint that's being managed. I think that's super important. We do a newsletter here at VMware every month that the SEs produce, and there's generic content that a group of folks put together. But then we tell the account SE, hey, go customize this based on how your engagement's going with the customer. So it's similar to, not as impactful as your video, but the customization I think is there, and that's important.
There's also the idea that based on the tool, you're able to get analytical information and statistics and metrics from who saw the video, what did they watch the most, those kinds of things that you can't get when you just blow something out on YouTube. I mean, there's overall grand scale marketing numbers you can get, but it's a completely different scenario when you use some of these tools that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's huge. So Rob, let's talk a little bit about, the value. And I think that's always a topic that every leader has to contend with, is how are you actually, and this is a two-part question, how are you actually quantifying the value of the SE in a digital selling world? And then will sales leaders say do more with less, or allow teams to scale headcount effectively?
I like to say if you can't manage it, you can't measure it. So if you want to manage something, it must be measured, and especially in pre-sales. When you look at shiny new toys on the market and they say, yes, we're going to help you scale, or we're going to automate this piece of your job, and you're going to be able to reduce headcount by this much, or you're going to be able to automate this much. We are all about ROI. A lot of us come from software sales backgrounds, and the return on the investment is critical, especially in pre-sales. So you must measure it, and that's my accountability at Stevo Systems, where the pre-sales and the account management and enterprise sales teams act as co-pilots. We run the ROI of the demos. We use things like consensus to allow us to facilitate this and to track and measure this, because at the end of the day, we have to turn this back into our executive team and say, yes, this investment was worth it because it reduced this. We could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it reduced the sales cycle by this much, or we got a hold of this key stakeholder that we never would have seen because we weren't in that part of their business, and they opened up the demo and saw it. So we see the value there, and it's measured in a very binary way. Did we win more deals at the end of the day? And can we point to a solution that allows us to do that? So managing and measuring, especially on the return on the investment with pre-sales and digital solutions to allow us, there's so many out there. My recommendation is make sure that you just like we do here, have a proof of concept, have some kind of a sandbox that you really understand the value that you can use to facilitate the internal selling of it, because you're going to be the pre-sales internally as well as externally at your company. And then do you do more with less? It depends. What we're seeing is we don't have to increase our headcount, and our sales engineers are occupying their time with customizing demos and not repetitive demonstrations that can be automated. So we're not seeing a reduction in headcount, but we're certainly not seeing tenfold, because we have to, all of a sudden customize demos and be on site in 10 different places. That's the thing of the past.
Yeah. And I think that notion of doing more with less, there is more to be done, that the less, becomes a non-reality, right? Because you have so many new things that you have to be able to activate with customers. And I know earlier we were talking about, how far in the sales cycle does the SE go into the sales life cycle? And that's always a big question that I think some of these digital centers or digital sellers will be able to help solve as well. Thanks for that, Rob. As we think about, the scaling out, right? Then the secondary question, Delia, is the putting ourselves out of a job, right? If you think about the scale out function of, say, for example, the demo component, are you hearing that question, and how are you handling the response to that specific question around being put out of a job?
On the contrary, we don't look at it as being put out of a job, but in allowing our solution consultants to be able to spend their time on the high value work that they need to do. So we're not burdened by the Harbor Tour demo where someone, forgive me, I just call it the throwing spaghetti at the wall demo, where you show everything, and spending time on situations that may not be as well qualified or have the needs that we think they do. We're able to use our digital tools to determine that information, to share information with the customer, so that by the time the solution consultant gets to them, they're going to be able to really spend time in discovery and targeting the presentations and answering the customer's very specific questions. And that also helps us to scale. Look, as far as our company is concerned, our teams are growing dramatically. And so it's just a different way that you're optimizing the use of the solution consultant throughout the sales cycle. So we haven't seen anybody be put out of a job by these digital tools.
Yeah. And let's talk about the tools, right? Because it always, I mean, the big question for SE orgs tends to be around budget, right? A lot of times, either the budget's owned by the sales organization or operations, and you have to like beg and plead for budget. You know, this question is actually from the Slack channel from one of our audience members. Who owns the budget? I'm curious from each of you, if y'all can share in your organizations, who's the owner of that? And I'll start with you, Rob.
I am, because only because I established the Center of Excellence, and I got the attention of the executives that the PreSales in North America that acts as the Global Center of Excellence owns the PreSales digital transformation budget.
Awesome, thank you, Cristina.
It is part of the sales budget. Actually, in our case, it started as our PreSales budget, and then Consensus became global, and now it's part of the sales organization budget.
Awesome. And Delia?
So in our situation, it started out with PreSales Budget, and in fact started out as a pilot, which, by the way, we were asked to do in order to justify the fact that we were using these digital tools and they would be productive. It was overwhelmingly successful. And so it's owned by PreSales and sales for a long time now, just because of some juggling organizationally. Our product marketing department owns the budget for it, but we're continuing to add accounts in sales and pre-sales all the time.
That's awesome. And I think that's super important, right? Understanding how you all can help structure kind of the function of the digital sellers into this motion will be extremely important. Let's go to this quote, Cristina, here. Ted Jansen said, "We are too busy digging this trend with our hands when all we need to do is fix the spark plug in the excavator." What a quote. Where should leaders start when looking to scale pre-sales through digital automation?
That's an interesting statement, and I think it makes even more sense for technical people. We love solving problems. When we see a problem, we want to start solving it right away. However, it is important to be more strategic, take one step back, and look at the big picture of the situation. So investing time in planning is key to success. As I said before, planning phase is when we engage sales leadership and agree on desired outcomes. Once we have a good plan, it is just a matter of execution. And just to add one more ingredient to this recipe, a certain dose of urgency, it is important so we can accelerate the digital transformation.
And I'm curious from the rest of the team, what are your thoughts on that quote? Delia, if you could also share your thoughts.
Well, I think that it's important for us to determine not only what we're doing today, but what we're going to be doing 5 years from now in terms of using digital tools and digital technology to help us. And if we can broaden the perspective of the organizations, as Cristina has talked about internally selling, we can broaden those expectations to leadership to help them see the success that we've had and the fact that this is where we're moving, period. This is where the world is moving. Then we're not just, what was it, using a shovel? I can't remember it. I don't have the quote in front of me. I think that's going to make a huge difference in us being able to broaden the scope of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
There are very few software companies that care about pre-sales like companies like Consensus do. And I would recommend reaching out to the companies that care about pre-sales because they probably have a lot of statistics and data that can really be helpful in justifying your investment with your gut on where your organization needs to go, especially when it comes to the justification around these solutions. And then just making sure that your pre-sales people, you're going to be selling this internally just the same as you're selling it to your prospects and customers today. So you're the best people, in my opinion, at the company to get the globalization of that mind share and making the difference.
And so we're talking about starting, and these are some additional questions we're getting here from other folks. But let's talk about the future, right? So we had an unexpected event that's accelerating what probably many of us have been talking about for quite some time. But what do you all think the future looks like for the pre-sales function as it relates to digital acceleration? And we'll start with Cristina.
Yeah, I think it will dedicate more time to higher value opportunities, as I mentioned before. And I think Delia mentioned this as well. So we should automate all these other things that can be automated, right? If I can just send a video to a customer, it is a smaller opportunity. Let's do it. And let's dedicate our time to higher value opportunities.
Yeah, I'm curious, Delia, what are your thoughts on that, on the future?
I think that pre-sales is never going away and that it's more broad and deep than it's ever been. And our role in the sales cycle and in getting business for our companies and in driving revenue for our companies is more important than it's ever been. Using these digital tools, we're going to be able to take the things that we can replicate over and over again that we don't need to think about and have digital systems that will help us do those things so that we can dedicate our time to really building the relationships with our customers, to figure out what their business needs from us, to be very prescriptive and targeted about that. Look, salespeople are developing relationships with customers, and it's our job to be able to not only do that, but to help them see what kind of business they can have in the future if we can help them. And using these digital tools is going to help us to do that better, but we're not going away.
Yeah, we're definitely not. Rob, curious to see your thoughts.
I've been doing this role for going on my 18th year coming up here in January. And just watching the evolution of where we were in the early 2000s versus where we are now, and just watching how quickly sales cycles happen, how quickly buyers make decisions, how accelerated the value is, and how much more at the forefront, and really being the pulse of the customer and the pulse of the buyer and the pulse of the prospect. Pre-sales is right there at the cutting edge. Technologically, intellectually, we have to be on top of our game when it comes to everything, whether it's social, whether it's political, whether it's software, whether it's technology. I mean, it's the future. So I may be biased, but I'm going to be here, not going anywhere, like Delia said.
I think we're all a little biased on this topic. So let's think about this, right? When we're looking at this implementation, we kind of touched on this slightly earlier, but different angle to this question. Actually, no, let me ask this question first. This is from the audience. Considering buyers often reach out with good amount of initial research and are looking for more deep technical information, do you leverage any value demonstrating tools that allow the buyer to have hands-on keyboard? Example, dummy APIs, custom environments, like versions of the tools. And what pros and cons have you seen with this? Up for any of you who might have experience with this.
Hey, Marjorie, I'll start because it's scaling this part of it is a real challenge, I think, for all pre-sales, and knowing when hands-on keyboard versus a video demo or a click-through demo, which is going to be good enough. In my opinion, when I go and buy a new car and that's expensive, and I look for the value, I'm going to take a test drive no matter what. And we see the buyers and their teams doing that more and more these days at any scale, at any size deal. So scaling this up and making sure if you have a solution like ours where you need to spin up something and stand up a cloud secure environment quickly, I think that's going to be a big challenge in the future as the volume increases and deal sizes as solutions and software companies grow. That's just from the software industry's perspective. but I see that as a trend for sure. I'm sure everyone can agree there.
Thanks, Rob. Anyone else have a perspective on this one?
I think it is important to consider the buyer journey. So some people, they are just searching for something. And for them, it makes more sense to just send a maybe higher level demo. But as the customer progresses in this journey, at some point, maybe they will need to talk to a SC, and that's perfectly fine, right? So I think the key here is to have the right solution depending on each phase of the buyer cycle.
No, and I want to get back to the buyer piece here in a second, but Delia, any thoughts for you on this one?
Yes, I think I agree with Rob. This is going to be a challenge moving forward. It continues to be a challenge, and it's going to get even greater for what you just described. I think that the thing that we have to really be sensitive about is where the customer is in their journey. So if somebody is in the kicking the tires stage, I'm not sure that I want them driving my car yet, to Rob's point. But if we know that those are customers that are heavily into the buying cycle, which as the person who put in the question, they've done a lot of the research themselves. And I think we have to be prepared to allow for hands-on work and activity, but we have to balance that with possible custom work that we may have to do in our environments to enable them to be able to participate in that way.
Yeah. And all of you have talked about the buyer in different aspects, but I want to talk about the relationship aspect of this. And this is one that, I tend to come across fairly often in my organization. How are you all dealing with, how are customers receiving this new digital engagement as opposed to, I know Autodesk probably experiences this as probably, the more high touch in-person engagement. And I'm curious to hear from all of you, how are customers receiving this more digital approach to the engagement than the more traditional selling method that we've had for several decades? Curious to hear from any of you.
I know for us, the buyers don't have to wait as long. The time to value for them is significantly reduced. I mean, I could get somebody, if somebody was like, hey, we were in a proof of concept and it wasn't going anywhere, and it's a big company and we're 2 weeks behind and we've got to go, and we get this justified and we need to get something stood up today, we could get something stood up today. 5 years ago, I don't know if we could have even, if we tried hard to get something of value stood up as quickly as we can now. So just the wait time and the time to value for somebody to get something, whether that's a video or even a sandbox. I mean, it's clear that we're not doing it fast enough, but it's significantly faster than it was.
Yeah. Cristina or Delia, thoughts from you?
I agree with Rob that customers are well receiving this type of content. I would say that maybe the biggest pushback that we get is from the sales reps, the account executives. They don't want to send a video to their customer. They want to have a SE on the call, but customers, they are well receiving this type of engagement.
That's great. That's great to hear. Delia, your thoughts?
I completely agree with Cristina. We don't hear it so much from the customers as we do from the sales teams, because the sales teams are reticent to change that face-to-face scenario. It's their job to maintain those relationships. And so it's been difficult and challenging. The fact is the customers, particularly in my space, are moving faster than they ever have before. And the fact that we can enable them to make decisions or get to decisions more quickly because their job requires them to move more quickly is not the pushback that people think we're going to get, because they need whatever the solutions are and they need them yesterday. And we want to be able to provide that information so they can make those decisions as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And so before we close out, I do have one more question for all of you. And we've talked about sales a bit here, but how do we bring our sales friends along in this process and in this journey?
Well, from my perspective, it's just proving that it works. So
right.
I had mentioned a pilot that we did for the consensus system very early on, not only to approve the budget and make sure we can justify the budget for the system, but also to prove that we're actually accelerating sales cycles, and we're getting interest from customers more quickly, and we're getting information to customers more quickly. Honestly, I think that is really what has made the biggest difference as far as my organization is concerned, is that we've proven that it works. And so people are now on board more than they ever have been.
That's fantastic. Cristina and Rob.
I would say lots of education and repetition, and also recognizing the early adopters. So that was very helpful for us when people started seeing their peers closing deals, only using videos. They wanted to do the same as well.
I can't agree more. And if you go to our QBRs and you look at our top sales and our top salespeople, they were the early adopters in some of these digital tools, and they are seeing the value and proving the value to their peers who may have been skeptical, but now aren't. So getting the salespeople to be your evangelists when it comes to this, I think that's critical, and it will provide you with exponential adoption once it starts to materialize.
This is a fantastic conversation, y'all. I think this is a must for every leader, whether you're in pre-sales or sales or even in professional services, any customer-facing role. I think we need to start thinking about the new world and how customers want to engage with us going forward. For a quick recap for our audience, recommendations from the leaders here go from making sure that you're gaining buy-in from different parts of the business and making sure that you're putting together the business case along with defining the value and how you're going to be measuring success for this program. Understand the tools that you're going to need to put into play, and that you're creating a well-defined process for your team members as they're looking to engage in this new format. Budget, extremely important. It can sit in any part of the organization. Make sure you're uncovering that early, and that you're putting together a plan for the money that you're going to need, because tools are going to be an important part of this. And we talked about the sellers and making sure that we've got our sales friends that are part of this, give them training, make sure they understand the why behind we're doing this. And I think, the biggest one that I heard was demonstrating to them that it works and that they can still sell in this new model, in this new format. So lots to be done here. I think we'll continue to see more and more of this evolution on how pre-sales and how just in general, how we're engaging our customer base going forward in the future. Quick one-word closing thought from each of our panelists before we go to our next session. Delia, let's start with you.
Wow, I can't do anything in one word, Marjorie. Digital systems are here to stay, so let's embrace them and make the best use we can.
Love it. One sentence is fine. I'll give everyone one sentence. Cristina.
We have to lead the way.
Lead the way. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so true. Yes. Rob.
Quantify early and often.
Quantify. Yes. This is great. Great one-liners. Hopefully all the leaders here have some great tips to start putting together their digital plans. And I'd love to hear about them because, like I said, I talk about this fairly often here internally, and I love to hear the creative, innovative ways that y'all are doing things.